prescribed fire training. There's more people trickling in, so I will just move into the agenda before we do introductions. If you would all like to start writing your names down in the chat, and just kind of where you are, where you're from, I guess, we can start doing that too, while I move through the agenda. Tonight we are going to do just a very quick, brief overview of what we talked about on Monday night. And then we're going to jump right into burn plans and layouts, firing devices and patterns that we can use on prescribed fire, common terminology, so that way everyone can be on the same page and know what everyone's saying. We'll talk about firing principles and holding principles and some control issues on lines that we've seen. We'll talk about hand tools and radio communications and some firefighter standard operating procedures and guidelines that are just good to know, but also translate into prescribed fire. And I'll kind of walk us through how they translate into prescribed fire. So that's kind of what the gist is going to be for tonight. Again, my name is Tori Norville. I'm with UC Cooperative Extensions. I'm the Fire Science Advisor with Sonoma, Napa, and Marin counties. I'm also with Napa PBA. And then we have Bailey, who's our other speaker. I'll let her.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bailey Adams. I work for the Yolo County Resource Conservation District, and I am the coordinator for the Yolo Prescribed Burn Association. Elizabeth?
Great. And my name's Elizabeth Davis. I'm the person who's been coordinating the Solano PBA kind of meetings that we've been having and coordinating hopefully some burns in the near future. And I work for Solano Resource Conservation District. I won't be presenting tonight, but if you guys have any technical difficulties, you can reach me in the chat. Just make sure that you click on the chat button and make sure that it says to Elizabeth Davis, and hopefully I can help you figure out what's wrong. And if you have any questions, there is a Q&A button. So please put any questions into the Q&A and I will kind of help feed those to Tori and Bailey as we go along. And then one more thing is that we'd love to know where a lot of you are coming from today. And if you're associated with any PBAs and just what your name is, and you can go ahead and drop that in the chat. Some people have already done that. Yeah, I think that's it.
And I just want to make it clear that we are recording this, so if you don't want to be recorded, just keep your camera off. This is so that way we can share it with you, so that way you have it after the fact and share it with the people who weren't able to join us tonight. But yeah, so just want to make that clear. Next slide, please. So we're just going to do a quick recap from Monday. Monday, we talked about what fire is and just the fact that it's a chemical reaction between fuel, oxygen, and heat. If you take one of those components away, you'll not have the chemical reaction of the flame, which is always a good thing. So, or unless we want it, then it's not a good thing. So yeah, that's fire. Next slide. We also talked about the different components and the anatomy of fire. So what are all the naming conventions of the places of the fire? So we have, or the front of the fire, that's the top where the flame front is. And then we have the back, or the heel of the fire. That's where the fire starts with the ignition point, and it tends to move a little slower. The sides are the flank of the fire. And then we have a finger, which is just a piece of the fire that starts to come away from the flank and creates a pocket, which is the unburned part between the finger and the flank. We also have islands, which are just unburned fuel that are surrounded by burned. And then we have spot fires, which are outside of the fire and outside of the perimeter. We also have slopovers, and we'll cover those a little bit more tonight, but those are usually connected to the fire perimeter. Next slide, please. We also discussed pretty heavily the fire behavior triangle. So we have topography, weather, and fuel. Again, fuel is the only component between the fire behavior triangle and the fire triangle that is the same. Topography is whether we're steep and hilly or we're flat valley. Weather is things like temperature, relative humidity. Are we hot, dry, and windy, or are we cool, damp, and moist? Fuel is, we talked about how to describe fuel, different fuel types, arrangements and moisture. We talked about sizes of fuel. And then we spent quite a lot of time on fuel arrangement, so we can go to the next slide. Where we talked about is our fuels continuous, or is there gaps, and is that going to make the fire harder to carry through? Are we going to have to move our drip torch down a little bit more heavily to create that continuous fire movement, or is the fuel such that it's going to carry that fire? Do we have ladder fuels in our woodlands and timbered areas that are going to move the fire from the ground into the canopy and cause us problems down the line? Or is it pretty open and there's space that it should just stay on the ground? So these are things that we need to think about, and fuel arrangement comes very heavily into play with burn planning and burn unit layout, which Bailey is going to jump right into now, I think. I think that was the end. Yeah. So I'm going to turn it over to Bailey now.
Awesome. Thank you, Tori. All right, so we are going to get into it, and I am going to start out about burn planning and unit layout. So this section has a lot of words and not a lot of pretty pictures. I'm going to try to make it as interesting as possible, but this is a really important component of prescribed fire. But if you have any questions as we go along, please shoot those in the Q&A so that we can get your questions answered. But to get it started, a burn plan is a document that you complete before any work is done for your burn unit. It's going to operate as a playbook containing all the information you need to complete your prescribed burn. You can see here on the right-hand side, this is the front page of a standardized burn plan that you'll see, which is common for prescribed burns. There are often workshops or classes hosted by PBA groups that go into detail about how to complete a burn plan, especially for community members or landowners who don't have a background in prescribed fire or fire suppression, but I'm going to give a more broad overview of its components. So a well thought out burn plan is the best way to demonstrate due diligence, which is really important for liability, and it helps maintain safety on your burn. A burn plan can be completed by a burn boss, a fire agency professional, PBA coordinator, or a landowner. And the complexity and the level of detail can vary from one burn plan to the next, but it's recommended and sometimes required that you have one of these. Details include info about the unit, desired weather conditions, personnel needs, and important contexts. And burn plans take into account important factors, including temperature, humidity, wind, vegetation moisture, and smoke dispersion. So starting out with goals and objectives, it's an important component that not a lot of people think about at first is the goals and objectives of your burn. It's important to identify why you're burning and what you hope to get out of your burn, because this will help direct decisions like when and how you implement. A common acronym and guide for developing goals is being SMART, S-M-A-R-T. Your objectives should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Some common goals that you'll see are reducing hazardous fuel loads and wildfire risk, improving habitat or forage, and restoring ecosystem health by controlling invasive species and promoting native ones. So for your pre-burn considerations, that will include all of the factors you should be thinking about to make sure you can safely and effectively implement your burn. This will include any pre-treatments of fuels or what type of containment lines will be needed, and also if there are any existing fire breaks to build off of. It also will identify important resources like water or valuable assets that need to be protected. And it also considers other things like unit access. So the prescription is one of the most talked about components of a prescribed burn. It's a set of criteria that is determined before the day of your burn that defines the conditions under which the burn can safely and effectively be implemented to meet your desired outcomes. They are measurable and define the acceptable ranges for temperature, humidity, wind speed, fuel moisture, and probability of ignition. This section can be more challenging for people to complete if you are new to prescribed fire. And it really just takes time and experience to develop this skill. The values that you put in for each of the components will have your target or desired conditions for an ideal burn, but you will also include values for the lower or cooler end of your prescription and the higher or hot end of your prescription. So for example, for temperature, if we are burning in a grassland and your ideal temperature is 70 degrees because grasses are fine fuels, which means they are heavily influenced by temperature and humidity. Your cooler prescription might be 60 degrees and your hot end might be 95 degrees. Because if you go below 60 degrees, your fuels might not burn efficiently or consume all the fuel because of the lower temperature. You won't be able to achieve your objectives. And then on the other end, burning when it's over 95 degrees can be risky because your fuels will be dried out and very ready for ignition, which could compromise the safety of your burn. It is important to note that many times not all of your values will be at the desired level for the burn, but it's a balance of all of the values and being within the lower and upper limits that keeps you within your prescription. Next up is the Smoke Management Plan, or SMP. You may also be required to complete an SMP plan as part of your burn planning process. This plan incorporates details from air quality, meteorology conditions, and fuel conditions. The requirements for this vary from one air district to another, but you can think of this as a smoke prescription. And it's typically completed through an online portal called PFERS, which stands for the Prescribed Fire Incident Reporting System. Most of the required information for the SMP is info that you would also include in your burn plan, but there's an additional focus on air quality factors such as expected pollutant emissions, smoke travel projections, nearby population centers, and smoke minimization techniques. By requiring prescribed burns to complete an SMP, this allows for local air districts and the California Air Resources Board to manage for air quality and incorporate prescribed burning into their air quality impact allowances. So next up, we have the ignition and holding plan. Your ignition plan will describe how you will apply fire to your burn unit. Here you're going to detail what types of ignition devices, patterns, and techniques you'll use to light your unit. It's important to note that for this section, you want to be informative, but not overly specific. So, for example, you don't want to write that you will begin ignitions at an exact time or that you will be igniting with a specific firing pattern, because on the day of your burn, the conditions may not. If in the unlikely chance that something goes wrong with your burn plan will be referenced. And if you took actions that were not outlined in your burn plan, then it will show that you did not plan appropriately. So that's just something to keep in mind when people are writing these plans, is that you want to have good information, but not, back yourself into a corner. So next is the holding plan, and this describes how you will manage and contain your fire. Here you detail the anticipated fire behavior, what resources like people and equipment will be needed, and your plans to monitor weather throughout the burn. I'll touch more on the roles and responsibilities of these components in just a minute, though. Next is your post-burn activities. In this section, you'll describe what actions you will take to secure your burn unit. We covered what this could look like in the first presentation, but the important concept here is what actions are needed to ensure that your burn does not reignite. Other information that could be included here is if you have a fire effects monitoring plan. This would detail if you have someone designated to observe and track things like weather, smoke and fire behavior before, during, and after the burn. And collecting data for this allows for analysis to determine if objectives were met, and it provides valuable information for future prescribed burn planning. And lastly, it could include any plans for project rehabilitation, such as seeding or planting after your burn. Next up is notifications. It's incredibly important to make sure that you are in communication with all the necessary parties before, during, and after your burn to not create any unnecessary disruptions and to stay in compliance. Before your burn, you should be in contact with your neighbors to let them know you will be burning so they know it's a prescribed burn and not an accident or a wildfire. You will also be in contact with your local air quality district and fire agency, whether that's a local fire protection district or CAL FIRE, beforehand as part of the planning and permitting process. On the day of the burn, you will need to receive ignition approval from local agencies before you begin operations. This can vary by location, but typically it includes getting ignition approval from your air district, the local fire agency, and local dispatch. This is important in case passerbys call in the fire, dispatch knows what's going on and can inform them that it's a prescribed burn. It's also important to have all these contacts in one place to reference easily on the day of the burn in case of an emergency. Okay, so the final components of a burn plan include all of the additional information and plans that would help you be prepared for any situations that occur on the day of your burn. This includes a wildfire conversion plan, which details who has the authority to declare a prescribed fire a wildfire and what contacts must be made. This would be in the event of the burned prescription parameters being exceeded to the point where holding and contingency actions cannot secure the fire or it's spread outside the project area.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that, Bailey,
Yeah.
there's a difference between like it's turned into a wildfire and a slop over. Would you
Yep.
mind clarifying
Yeah.
the difference between those two?
Yep. So a slop over means that your fire has moved outside the perimeter or the containment line. But that means, so when it comes down to prescribed fire in your planning and being able to show your due diligence, it all comes down to did the fire remain within your control? So if you have a slop over, which goes outside of your containment line, there's still opportunities for you to contain that fire and adjust what's going on with that situation, as long as you maintain control of your fire. And a wildfire conversion plan is when that it's beyond the extent of a slop over and it's no longer within your control. And in that situation, it's where we need to the decision by usually the burn boss is made to alert authorities that the fire is no longer within control and that emergency assistance is needed. But that is an important distinction. So thank you for that, Elizabeth.
Yeah, it's part of the reason when people talk about prescribed burns not escaping. I mean, we're not talking about agencies, but like people who are doing prescribed burns privately, when they don't escape, they mean there might be a slop over, but that does not mean it leads to a wildfire, just to give that distinction.
Yep. Thanks. So the next thing that might be included is, or will be included, is a contingency plan. This considers the low probability or the unlikely case, but with high consequence events. So this is in worst case scenario, which is unlikely to happen, but what's the worst thing that could happen? You need to be able to plan for that. So this will detail actions needed to mitigate those events and how to keep the fire within the scope of the plan. Other plans that might be included are medical, communication, and safety. And I'll note that what plans are needed and the level of detail in your burn plan will vary based on the complexity and the risks of your burn, but it's important that the burn plan matches the needs of the burn.
Okay, and then Bailey, while
Yeah.
we're still talking about burn plans, there was a question.
Cool.
And someone was hoping if you could talk a little bit about prescriptions. I don't know if there's time for it, but they were just kind
Yeah.
of curious if there's standard prescriptions for vegetation types. You did kind of touch a little bit like on grasses, like a 70 degrees when you were talking about temperatures. But yeah, just thinking of
Yeah.
vegetation types,
So
time of year, slope aspect, those sorts of things.
yeah, I wouldn't say that there's a good rule of thumb. I would say that there are a lot of really great resources online that talk about vegetation and kind of what you would expect to see for their fine dead fuel moisture, which is for finer fuels, that's the level of moisture in them. There isn't like an easy application or something that I know of where you just kind of type in what you got and it pops out stuff for you. It's really a balance of the best written prescription who have been doing this. You know, you see people who work for fire agencies or have been doing prescribed fire for a long time. They, you know, if you give them a scenario, they can rattle you off a general prescription. But there are good resources online, and the one thing to note is that it can vary a lot, not only from the type of fuel but from locations. You know, winter burning is more popular because it can be applied on the landscape successfully and safely in, you know, the foothills in pine understory, but we're not really going to be doing that kind of burning out here in Yolo County in our grasslands. So we might be able to talk about this a little bit more at the field day, but it's a balance of experience and then also just getting more familiar with you know, your fuels, what you have on your property. The other good thing, the way that I develop my prescriptions is I work with my local air quality district too. They're really happy to help with getting prescribed burning on the ground. That's the Yolo Solano Air Quality Management District. And there are resources like that who are able to guide you when you're first doing this. Karen, do you have something to add?
I do. And
Awesome.
that is if you are intending to burn with if one of your objectives is to control a particular plant species, and you're wondering, how does this thing respond to fire? Can I burn it well? The Fire Effects Information System is a database from the US Forest Service, and I'll put it in the chat box, where you can look up the species of interest and find all of the fire research related to that plant that the Forest Service has access to. And you can look, how does it respond to fire, or to fire? How many times does it need to be burnt in order to kill it? What happens to reseeding after fire? So if you really want to nerd out on writing your prescription and figuring out some of the elements in there based on one plant species in particular, that's a good resource.
Thanks for adding that, Karen. Yeah, and to add on, like what I was saying about the air quality district, also through this process, you're going to be getting a burn permit through, you know, either CAL FIRE or your local fire protection agency. And a lot of times, you know, this is information that you're going to be reviewing with them beforehand. And if you write something that's just kind of out of reality or off the wall, they'll let you know and kind of help guide you and give you feedback on what a reasonable prescription would look like as well. Okay. Okay. So after burn plan, the next thing I wanted to touch on is the Incident Action Plan, or IAP, as you will often hear it referred to. This document is used with burns involving any fire agency staff. It's a document prepared before the burn, like the burn plan, that details most of the same logistical information in the burn plan, but it's presented in a format that is readily used by different agencies. This one will have information like incident objectives, work assignments, like you see here, and radio communications plan, medical plan, and maps of the unit. The purpose of the IAP is to provide clear direction and all the critical information about the burn in a format that is easily accessible to all participants. Though what this document serves as is it's something that you'll see on wildfires, and like I said, prescribed fires with agencies, or sometimes even if agencies aren't a part of your burning operations. It's just a document that provides, it's a universal format for incident management systems in order to respond to incidents. So it puts everything, a lot of the information that you would see in the burn plan in a format that is interchangeable from agencies like fire suppression agencies or law enforcement. So you might be wondering how all of the information I just covered in the burn plan and the IAP gets shared with everyone, especially for participants who just show up and have no prior knowledge about the burn. This happens through a morning briefing. Before every burn, all personnel gather to review the information, often in a streamlined format of the burn plan or the IAP. This is where critical information like unit description, burn objectives, radio communication channels, and medical emergency plans are reviewed. It's also where work assignments will be designated. These briefings are usually held early in the morning, but I can't stress enough how important it is to be there on time. If you're late or miss the briefing, someone will have to take extra time to get you up to speed, and you often won't get the same level of briefing the rest of the participants will get. Okay, next we're going to move on to prescribed fire unit layout. Here's a map of a prescribed burn that the Yolo PBA completed last year. How to select the layout of your unit depends on assessing many factors of the site, all of which are detailed in your burn plan, such as fuel load and type, slope and aspect in the unit and adjacent to the area that you'd like to burn. Also, any existing features you can use as containment lines or structures you want to avoid and protect. So on this map, you can see the red lines show the perimeter of the unit corresponding to containment lines that have been prepared on the ground. It clearly identifies where the burning will occur inside of the red lines. It also has drop points, which are identified as the DP followed by a number on the map. And these are just pre-selected locations around the perimeter of the unit that allow for clear communication during the burn. This unit is about 27 acres, so it's helpful to be able to tell someone to bring drip torch fuel to drop point 1 instead of trying to describe where you're at in relation to them or to the unit. Additionally, you will see on the two sides of the unit an A marking the location of the Alpha holding crew and Z marking the location of the Zulu holding crew. So having a map like this that orients people to where they're at in relation to the unit is especially helpful for people who've never been out on the site before. This unit was in an open grassland on some low rolling hills with no structures nearby. So without having seen the unit before, it can be hard to orient yourself at first because there's nothing on the ground marking the unit other than the containment lines, which were mowed and disked. That's why a lot of times unit maps will be geo-referenced and shared with participants by a QR code or an email. That way you can load them onto your phone. If you add them to an app, such as Avenza is a really popular one, it will show your location on top of the unit map that you've been provided. So in this photo, it's from the burn unit shown in the map. You can see here in the background where the truck is parked, that's where the containment line is. You can see how the topography relates to the map. This photo in particular is of the test burn, which Tori talked about in the first session. It's a carefully selected subsection of the larger burn unit that is representative of the entire unit. So it has similar fuels, slope, shading, and things like that in a smaller section. And you're going to do a test burn to observe the fire behavior and fuel consumption to determine if the fire is going to do what you want for it to meet your objectives. If the test burn aligns with your objectives and you are within prescription, then the burn boss or the burn lead will make the decision to move forward with ignitions of the unit. However, if the test burn does not meet your objectives, for example, the fuels aren't dried enough and the fire isn't consuming enough of the vegetation, then the test plot will be extinguished and more time will be given for conditions to be met before attempting another test burn.
Hey, Allie, I've got, or Allie, sorry, too many Allies in the meeting. Bailey, there's a question that someone was asking. Is the actual date and time of ignition reported? And also is the date time the fire is out reported?
Yeah, so as far as I know, this can vary from location to location. I can speak for Yolo County, which is, yes, we are required to first contact air quality to make sure that it is a burn day. They know that we want to do our prescribed burn, and they have to give us ignition authority. Sometimes this is even done through the PFER system that I mentioned online. So it just depends on where you're at. And then also some regions will require that you contact either CAL FIRE dispatch or law enforcement dispatch to notify them before you actually do your ignition. And then once the burn is complete and you've secured your burn unit, you may still be doing some of those activities, but there's no active flame, and you've changed from your firing operations to securing, then we also call air quality and dispatch to let them know that the fire's out. Tori or Elizabeth, I don't know if you guys want to add anything about any of your experiences, but that's what I've experienced.
That covers it for us too.
Okay.
Yeah, usually you're calling when you're starting and when it's ending, just to keep everyone informed. So
it's kind of similar to agricultural burns. If people are used to doing those, you have to, call the burn line in the morning, get, approval, and then but with this one, you just are checking in more with agencies so that they know when you've actually ignited and then when you have completed your burn. Okay, so speaking of ignitions, there are many different ways to ignite your prescribed burn. One of the most common is with a drip torch. This is a canister that's filled with a mixture of fuel. It's a mix of gasoline and diesel. They can be mixed at different ratios depending on weather temperatures and what type of fuel you're burning, fuel being vegetation. And a common mix, at least that I've experienced, is a 60 to 40 ratio, 60% being diesel, 40% being gas. But like I said, you'll adjust that depending on if you have high temperatures or cooler temperatures, or what kind of fuel you're burning, whether it's fine or if it's bigger fuel. For the drip torch, you light the wick that is at the tip of the spout so that when you tilt the torch, fuel comes out and simultaneously lights while being applied to the fuels or vegetation. The loop that you see in the spout prevents the fire from entering the fuel canister once it's upright. We'll get a chance to work with drip torches on the field day. They won't be lit because it is active wildfire season, but we'll get a chance to mess around with those and assemble them on the field days. Another tool that is more common with landowners is a propane torch or weed flamer, which you can see there in the middle. Then you have fusees, which are common with fire agencies. Fusees operate by igniting the top of the flare, and they sustain flame by burning the phosphorus contained in the device. These burn very hot at 1400 degrees Fahrenheit. Next to that, we have the stubbies, which are a smaller version of the fusees, and they're intended to be launched or shot out of a device such as the Very pistol that you can see here up in the. These are less common because you need special training and permitting to operate a Very pistol. Okay, now we're going to talk about
Bailey,
Yeah.
just one thing. Some of the things, so Bailey listed off some of the really technical ones. But if you've ever attended like a cultural burn or something, natural materials. So like, for example, like a Thule bundle, or somebody might have pitch on the end of a wooden, like a torch, like actually made out of like wood. There's also natural materials. So just another thing that you might see, because some people are less comfortable with things like fuels. And so that's
Definitely. All right, next we're going to talk about firing patterns. So I'll just mention some of this can be hard to conceptualize while you're sitting at a desk, but just know that we'll be covering this on the field day as well. Again, without actual fire because it is active wildfire season. But the firing patterns and techniques you use on a burn will be dependent on the unit and the burn prescription. Strip firing is the most commonly used technique where you set fire to one or more strips of fuel and let them burn together. In this image, you can see the drip torches in parallel lines. Following slides will illustrate this better. This image is also from if you were burning next to an active wildfire, which is why it says main fire at the bottom. So I'll just note that. This is an important concept with all firing ignitions. An important concept with all firing ignitions is to have an anchor point, as you can see up in the left-hand corner of the image. All firing ignitions are started from a designated anchor point, which is a barrier or control line in place that prevents you from being outflanked by the fire. So this is a way to keep burners safe and make sure that they are able to exit from where ignitions are starting and have a safe place to go. So a backing fire is a very common technique that you'll see on prescribed burns. That's because it will have the slowest rate of spread compared to other patterns, which gives you more control and a lower fire intensity. For this, you will ignite going against the wind or slope. For the scenario in this picture, that means lighting on the right, off of your control line, while the wind is blowing to the right. Because you light next to your control line, even though the wind would push the flames to the right, there's no fuel there to ignite. Instead, the fire will continue to slowly spread to the left, even though the wind is blowing against it, because there's still unburned fuel there catching. This concept can also be applied to slope, where if you imagine the right side is the top of a hill and the left side is at the base of a hill. Like we talked about in the first session, slope has an impact on fire behavior and spreads upslope faster. So if the fire is lit at the top of the slope on the right-hand side, there's no fuel at the top to ignite, and it will slowly back down the slope to the left. In contrast to a backing fire, you have a heading fire. For this ignition, you have the fire front spreading with the wind or slope. This pattern will have a greater rate of spread and a higher fire intensity. You can see in the image on the left, they're igniting off of their control line on the left. The unburned fuel is to the right, and the wind is also pushing to the right. Those two factors work together for an increased rate of spread and a high fire intensity. This would also be the case if you were, sure what happened there, sorry about that. So if this were also applied to slope, then let me find my spot here. If the slope, hold on one second. Okay, so if the left side of the image was the base of your slope and the right side is the top, by lighting at the bottom on the left, the unburned fuel is upslope on the right. The fire would then burn upslope by preheating fuel and spreading rapidly, which is another thing that we covered in the first section. For this, it's important to note that in the image, when using a head fire, the control lines are denoted as reinforced. That's because a head fire will need more containment measures in order to offset the increased rate of spread and fire intensity to ensure it does not go outside the burn unit. Additionally, there are variations of heading fire like strip head firing, which you can see in the image on the right. This pattern is a series of strip firing set upwind of a control line so that each line will burn into one another, preventing a large buildup of fire intensity like you would get in the image on the left. In the left image, the more fuel and distance a fire can travel without being impeded, the more fire intensity will increase. With the image on the right, as one line burns into another, the fire intensity will be high when the two lines initially meet, but then it will die down because there's no remaining fuel to be burned. Hopefully you guys can follow this. Again, it's a little hard to conceptualize when you're just looking at these images, but we'll get a chance to hopefully walk through some of these on the field day. Next up, we have flanking patterns. Flanking fires are another type of strip firing that light into the wind or perpendicular to the slope direction, allowing fire to spread at right angles. The image on the left shows igniters walking upward into the wind. As they continue and the strips behind them continue to burn, they will spread out into a V shapes and burn into one another. This is another way to modify fire intensity. It's going to be more intense than a backing fire, but not as intense as a head fire. On the right, you can see chevrons, which incorporate elements of strip firing and flanking fire by igniting from a single origin and spreading out into a V shape. This is a more advanced firing technique used to widen a control line quickly or burn down ridge lines.
Again, sorry, too many alleys. Bailey,
okay.
If you go back a slide, somebody asked just for clarification.
Yeah.
Or I guess one more slide. As it said, is dripper 3 ahead of the other two? And I think or maybe it was a couple back, but
That's
took
a good
while
point.
talking
Are
about
they
who's
asking
in
about
what.
the patterns?
Exactly. They
Okay.
want to know who's in the front.
Cool.
So,
I actually have a slide coming up about that. That
Perfect.
is a better image than this. So I'll make sure to hit on that when we get to it.
thanks.
Okay. Okay, next we have, let's see, dot or point source firing. This is done by lighting individual dots or fire to regulate intensity. The more dots, the greater the fire intensity. Then you have ring firing, which is done by lighting fire in a circle around specific objects to exclude them or minimize them. In this image here, they're not doing it to protect a resource. They're just using it to spread out. But if you could imagine, say, a tree or a power pole in the center of there, this is a really great technique to prevent them from being exposed to too high of a fire intensity. So what you would do is you would fire in a circle around the object at the base of it, and the fire will spread outwards like the red arrows show. And what that does is it allows for the ignition to be at the base of the object, which will have a lower fire intensity, and then it will build up as it moves out. So if you imagine this, it's a way to protect that resource, because then if you have, say, what we were showing with like a backing fire or even a head fire, if that was part of your unit and coming towards this resource, it would slow down because it would have already burned out.
And I got one question for you about dot or point source fires. Somebody asked if it's also called jackpot burns. I'm not familiar with that term. I don't know if you are.
So the only way I've heard jackpots be used before is that's usually reference to if you have a broadcast unit and it's a specific spot within the unit that has a high buildup of fuels that are usually pretty receptive. So I haven't used that, or I haven't heard that used in terms of the dot firing. Dot firing is usually used if, again, to control the fire intensity instead of putting a solid strip down, or if you're trying to conserve fuel, it gets a similar burn to strip firing, but you don't have to use as much fuel, or if you're just trying to move quickly. But no, I haven't heard that used in the same sense as for jackpot. Sorry. Okay, so some firing terminology, and this is where we can get into who's ahead with the lighters here. But first, we have spacing. This one is the distance from one lighter to the next, if they were all lined up. So in this image, they're not lined up, they are offset. But if you could imagine lighter 2 is directly below lighter 3, and lighter 1 is directly below lighter 2, they would all be in a straight line. Spacing would be how far apart they are in that line. So typical spacing is, it'll depend on your fuels, but sometimes it'll be 10 feet or 20 feet between igniters. The next component of that is the stagger, which is why we see the lighters here not in a straight line, because typically when you're burning a unit and you're doing these strip firings, you want to make sure that you are not boxing anyone in, or, you know, if you light fire right next to somebody and they don't have enough time to clear out, you're going to be sending fire that way, which leads us into the 3, 2, 1, or depending on the orientation, 1, 2, 3. It just depends on which person is placed closest to the control line and who is walking first. So for this one, 1 is the closest to the control line, and 3 is out in front. So for this image right here, we have wind or upslope direction is going upward. So that means that our fire is going to want to move up. So if lighter 1 was ahead of lighter 2 and 3, the fire would be going directly towards them. Lighter 3 has to be out in front in order for them to safely be moving to the left. And then followed, lighter 2 is staggered behind so that they can light, and their fire will not reach to the point where igniter 3 is, because they've already moved through that section, and then so on with lighter 1. Again, this is kind of hard to conceptualize when we're just looking at these images, but we'll be doing this during the field day so that people can get a better idea. And we'll also go over some scenarios in which you would want lighter 1 out in front as opposed to lighter 3. It's all going to depend on wind or slope, essentially which direction the fire is going to be moving, and then making sure that you are offset from other igniters and not boxing them in. Okay, so some more terms. Black is a term used to describe an area of fire that has been burned. It can be a relatively safe area to be if all of the fuel has been burned. In contrast, green refers to areas that haven't burned or unburned fuels. So good black is used when we refer to a burned area that has no reburn potential. Blacklining is a way to burn in control lines before you begin ignitions to burn the whole unit, or even you could do this as part of your prep days before your actual burn. You can burn off of your control lines to widen it, which you can see in this image here. We're at the top of a slope and we're burning off the top up against this control line, which to the left is a disc line, so it's down to bare mineral soil. So we went ahead and burned off a chunk to make sure that our control line was even wider, which brings us to our next term, depth, which is a component of black line that describes the distance of black between the control line and unburned fuels. And depending on expected conditions and fire behavior, you would need more or less depth. There are a few different terms to describe a burn that is not consuming fuel evenly. Dirty or patchy burns and bellies or islands are all terms used to refer to fuel remaining. This picture is of active fire ignitions, so chances are that fuel will burn within, but right now you can see between the strips and how it's currently burning off, there is fuel within the unit that is unburned. So Tori's going to speak more about the span and chain of command, but just to give you an idea of the organization of being a part of what the firing team looks like, we have this diagram here. You have your burn boss who is leading the burn and in charge of the different resource teams. In the firing team, there will be a designated leader in charge of subsequent workers. And the primary goal of the firing crew is to use personnel, devices, patterns, and techniques to ignite in a way that accomplishes goals and objectives of the burn. There are some important principles to keep in mind if you are doing firing ignitions. You should light as you walk. You want to keep moving, and you do not need to stop to ignite fuel, as we saw from those firing patterns. They all involve the igniters continuing to move throughout the unit. You want to pay attention to the path ahead and look behind you to evaluate fire behavior. You never light below or upwind of someone else. This will send fire towards them and put them in danger. Never send head fire toward an unburned control line. You'll be sending a fire with high intensity towards the holding crew and challenge the holding potential of your control line. You want to keep edge fire ahead of the interior fire. Always tie into existing black or control lines, and practice good torch etiquette, which we'll cover more in the field day as well. So similarly to firing, you have your burn boss who is leading the burn and in charge of the different resource teams. In the holding team, there will be a designated leader in charge of subsequent workers, and there are often multiple holding crews to maintain control of the fire. The primary goal of the holding crew is to keep the fire within control lines. They do this by monitoring for any situation where the fire could potentially go outside the control lines of the burn unit. Important principles to remember are eyes on the green. Your focus is on the unburned material outside of the unit to monitor for potential issues. So like you can see from this photo here, even though the burn is happening behind this firefighter, he is faced the opposite way with his eyes on the green or unburned material, because that's where the risk for any spot fires or slop overs are, and that is what he is making sure he's taking accountability for. You want to stay active, alert, and prepared. You want to alert line supervisor if you see any holding concerns, issues, or hazards. You should mitigate holding concerns before they are ignited. And you can practice size up reports, which detail that you know where you are, what you have, and what you need, which is the information you would need to communicate to someone if you did have an issue on the holding line. So there's a variety of different equipment and resources that can make up the holding resources on a fire. Firstly, I'll mention that any slop overs or spot fires outside of the control lines are reported immediately to the burn boss or your supervisor, and they should be suppressed. Holding resources can consist of water tenders and fire engines and slip-on water tanks that are mounted on ATVs or side-by-sides or pickups. Crew members can have backpack pumps, which helps suppress small flare-ups, and crew members can complete various tasks with their hand tools, such as cutting wood, raking vegetation, digging control lines, and smothering flames. So unless we have any questions on that, we are about ready to take a break halfway. Do you have anything for me, Elizabeth?
Nope, there aren't any current questions. I think we've answered all of them.
Awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break, and we'll start up at 7:01.
All right, so we are gonna get started. We're gonna move right along into accountability. So there's a couple different aspects of accountability. The first one is we're going to talk about the chain of command. In wildfire and other emergency situations, fire agencies and emergency in general use the incident command system, which basically is a tiered system. You have an incident commander at the top, and then they have people who work under them, and those people have people that work under them. Basically, it's to help with no one person can manage more than like 7 to 12 people at a time. So when you have these very large incidents or fires that happen, yes, we have one person in charge, but there needs to be a lot of helpers to help make these decisions and stuff. So we kind of tend to pull that into prescribed fire a little bit. We can expand and contract the incident command system fairly easily. So the complexity of the fire is fairly low. We can have kind of less people in charge. And if it's a more complex burn, we can have more people in leadership roles. So just the chain of command, this one's kind of a very simple one. You'll have your incident commander or who's ever in charge of the burn. And then under that person, you have like the burn boss, you have a fire line observer who their job is to like wander around the fire, take fire behavior observations and broadcast weather reports over the radio periodically throughout the fire. And then you could have a safety component on your fire. The safety person could possibly be in charge of the EMT group if that's out on the fire, or it could just be one safety guy. The burn boss, they would be in charge of the different groups. So we talked about firing and holding groups. So you can have any number of those groups. In this scenario, we just have one firing group with 2 holding groups. And so all 3 of those leaders report up to the burn boss. So that way that person can make decisions on whether or not to continue to light fire on the ground, or if there's fire behavior issues, we need to move people around to take care of those. So here is a very, it makes a lot more sense once you're doing it, but I tried to kind of put the players onto a board game essentially. And the firing team are these red dot people. They're starting out, they're working their way across the unit. Holding team 1 is over on this side of the unit, and holding team 2 is the yellow cloud people on the other side of the unit, and the burn boss is just kind of floating around. Right now I have him with the firing crew. And so holding 1 can say, oh, hey, we found a spot fire. We're gonna put a couple people on that to wrap it up. And if they need more help, they can pull people from their holding team, or they could ask holding team 2 to send over a couple people to help them. Accountability wise, if you are worker 4 under holding team 1, you're gonna talk to your leader of holding team 1. And your leader, like if you have an issue, you talk to your leader, and your leader can bump it up to the burn boss. Don't go to leader of holding 2 if you're in holding team 1. So that's kind of just accountability, who to talk to, who to tell things to. Communication is huge on prescribed fires, so just knowing who you should communicate to will help things move along smoother. Yeah, so that's kind of the chain of command with accountability. There's another side to accountability, and that's taking accountability for yourself. So taking care of yourself, show up to with your proper personal protection equipment, so that's PPE. And so a lot of times on prescribed fires with prescribed burn associations, we like to wear natural fiber clothing because they will just burn, they won't melt. Synthetics will melt and burn you worse. Whereas natural fiber clothing will just burn off. And while you'll still get burned, you won't have to deal with like a plastic melting onto you. So it's better. And then we'll ask for safety glasses, gloves, and sturdy boots. That's 95% of the time, most prescribed burn associations are gonna ask you to show up like that. Occasionally, some burn PBAs, they're different complexity, there's other things going on, so Nomex might be provided, or helmets, other protection would be given out. Bring out any food and water that you might need for the day. Yes, PBAs usually get fed at the end of the day. But if you, especially like myself, I have dietary restrictions, so I feel like that's on me to provide my own food. And then always have your tool with you type of thing. And yeah, just come prepared, ready to work, and be accountable for what you're doing that day. There's a couple things of what not to do on a prescribed fire. So these ones would be, don't leave your assigned group unless you're told to do otherwise. Typically by your group leader. Like if your group leader says, hey, you need to go help that other group over there, go. Then you can leave your assigned group. Bailey talked about this a little bit, but don't show up late to morning briefings. There's a lot of important, crucial information that need to know during those, and it would also mean that someone has to take time out of their other tasks to bring you up to speed. Don't leave your gear all over the place. I know at some point we get tired and we put stuff down and then we forget to pick it up. Basically, don't have someone else be your mom on a prescribed fire. Make sure you know where all your stuff is, and just be accountable for that gear. And then this is kind of a double negative, but don't not listen to your leader or the burn boss or the incident commander or someone who's giving you instructions. Just don't not listen to it. Should probably be a better way to say that. So the next thing we're going to talk about is loss of control causes. So what causes fire to move outside of our lines? Most of these are forces that are outside of our control. Sometimes there's a burner error where we just move too fast, put too much fire on the ground, and it's just gets out of our control for a little bit. A lot of times it's wind. We get a gust of wind that picks stuff up, moves it across the line, and now I have a spot fire or a slop over. Sometimes it's fuel across the line, so this could be a branch that falls in that gust of wind, and now we have to move that branch before it catches on fire. Hopefully there's not trees falling down across our lines. Typically we walk all the lines before we start, so we can address that before, but if there's trees falling down during the prescribed fire, hopefully that's not happening, but it could happen. Just address it. And then roots are actually pretty common when we're burning in timbered areas. You'll scrape your line, but you don't notice the root that's going underneath all the dirt. So we'll see fire get into that root, go across the line, and then pop up on the other side, and ignite something over there. We typically see that like a couple days post prescribed burn. That'll be like during the mop up and patrol. We're kind of just checking things out. A couple days later, we'll find something that popped up because of a root. That's fairly common actually. Other things are just not properly tied into the lines. So this is that term anchoring in. We really want to have our black match up with our control lines, and really be anchored in and strong there. A lot of times we're working on slopes, so we'll get rolling material. These could be like tree branches, tree logs, rolling down the hill, that sort of thing. And they could be ignited, and so now fire is rolling down the hill. There are ways to build your control lines to catch some of that material, or we can shift all of the material to be parallel with the slope instead of perpendicular. I think that was right, yeah. Such that they won't roll, they'll just stay there. So there's ways to mitigate that. And then hotspots and flare up later, that again, that's during that after the burn, we're patrolling, we're looking for these hot spots. Hopefully we'll see smokes and go put them out before they cross the line type of thing. We've talked a lot about slapovers and spot fires, but I just kind of want to drill these in a little bit with a picture. Because they do get interchanged a lot and they mean two different things. And they can cause communication issues down the line. So let's say this is our burn unit. We're pulling fire down, bringing it down the line. And then all goes outside of our perimeter line. This would be a slap over because it is attached to the main fire. It just crossed our perimeter and control line. And so if this happens, you just kind of communicate to your leaders, say, hey, there's a slap over. That gets communicated up to the burn boss. They make the decision of, do we call this more bonus acres because we were going to burn this unit anyway, or do we need to stop firing and go and put a line around this and just put it back where it needs to be. Spot fires are, again, not connected to the fire anyway. They're just off over here by themselves, usually through embers. Again, same tactics. If you notice them, let your leader know, and then the leader will contact the burn boss, and again, they will make the decision of what to do with them. Usually put them out. So we're going to briefly talk about hand tools. We're going to go way more in depth in these at the field days. We'll get to play with them. We'll get to use them. But we'll just name a few of them. This is a McLeod. It's really, I like this tool a lot. It's probably one of my favorite tools. You can, it's kind of got like a hoe type scraper tool on one side and then a rake on another. So I like it a lot. It's two different tools that I can use to build line fairly easily and clean up line really easily. This is a Pulaski. It's a combination of a hoe and a axe. So it's a cutting, grubbing tool. Not my favorite tool, only because it's got a short handle and I've got a back that hurts when I bend over for too long. So it's not my favorite tool. But it is really useful to dig out roots that we see on the lines. So good tool for that. Shovels come in really handy for mop up and when we're trying to clean up and get all those hot spots. You can put a little bit of water on the hot spot and then kind of mix the dirt around and make a slurry. And shovels are really good for that. This tool here is kind of like a snuffer flapper thing. I've only ever used it as a snuffer, so you kind of put your boot on it, the rubber piece, and kind of drag it along, and you can snuff out very small baby flames. So it can help make your control line with like black lining. It can help with that. I've very rarely used these actually. Like I've only ever used it once. So, but they're out there. And then the backpack pump is an incredibly useful and versatile tool on prescribed fire. And we use it a lot for both firing and holding resources. We'll use it. Mop up will use it. You can control your water use with it. So we'll play with that on the field day and kind of take it through its courses. Radio communications. We're also going to practice this on the field day. But there's a couple key things with radio etiquette. Most radios have a button on the side that you press and you key up. And usually there's a little bit of lag time on most radios, especially if you're using like a repeater that basically allows your signal to get amplified across a greater distance. It takes a minute for that signal to hit the repeater to be sent out. So you always want to pause for a minute before you speak. So I will usually hit the radio, count to 3, and then start speaking. When we're on the radios, we just use common language. We don't need to say 10-4, Roger, copy, all this radio lingo that may or may not be out there. just rate regular common language. That way everybody knows what we're talking about and it's very clear and communication is understood. You also don't need to say please and thank yous. So we don't need to say like, I need 4 people on the east flank, please, thank you. Just say, I need 4 people on the east flank. That's just common radio etiquette. Say what you need to say and then get off the radio. It's a very powerful tool. It's really helpful with communication, but we don't necessarily need a novel. And then again, like we talked about, slop over and spot fire, they're just common terms that get mixed up. Same with torching and crowning. We talked about these on the first night on Monday, but torching is just one tree on fire, whereas crowning would be multiple canopies on fire. And so if you that's going to elicit a very different response than, oh, there's a tree torching. So just things to be aware of. If you get them confused, just start to add a little bit more information. There's one tree on fire, I think it's torching. Or there's 5 trees with fire in the canopy. That way you're just taking those words out of the question and you're giving more information to people to make decisions. And again, we'll practice radios on the field day. So we're next going to move into some wildfire standard orders of practice and guidance, SOPs and SOGs. These are made for wildfire situations, but they can be directly applied to prescribed fire, and they were made out of near misses, injuries, and fatalities that have occurred over the years. So they're good things to keep in the back of our heads, and I'll kind of walk through how we're going to mesh them into prescribed fire. So the first 10 that we're going to go through are the 10 standard firefighting orders. The next group is called the 18 watch out situations. So we'll just go through the 10 first. The first one is keep informed on fire weather conditions and forecasts. So again, this is just, we want to stay up to date with the weather. We want to know what the weather is being predicted for that day, and that will help us determine what the fire behavior should be. The second one is know what your fire is doing at all times. So again, we have that predicted fire behavior, so we want to make sure that what we're seeing is what we predicted. If something's a little bit more spicy than what we thought it was going to be, why is that happening? We just always want eyes on the fire. If you can't see the fire, make sure that you're in contact with someone who can. That'll be another one somewhere else, but it's just a good idea to, if you can't see it, make sure you at least have an idea of what it's doing. The third one is base all actions on current and expected behavior of the fire. So again, we should know what the weather is doing such that we can predict what the fire is going to do down the line. If we are looking at what the fire is doing right now and it's a little bit more hotter and the behavior is a little bit more intense than what we anticipated it, I need to look at that and make decisions now in order to bring that fire behavior down. So maybe I'm going to shift people from firing to another holding team. Maybe you're firing, or maybe your holding leader is going to move you to a different location on the line. Just watching the fire and being able to plan ahead is kind of what this one's getting at. So number 4 is identify escape routes and safety zones and make them known. So these should be identified during the briefing. And escape routes are basically the route that you're going to take in case something goes wrong and you need to leave the area quickly. You should be identified and you should know where it is. You should know how to get there. And all of this should be laid out during briefing. Safety zones is where you're going to hang out if something goes wrong. And in a safety zone, the fire should be able to move around you and not impact you too terribly. Like you're probably going to be coughing smoke, but you shouldn't be getting burned, essentially. So knowing where your safety zones and your escape routes are is a really good thing to know. Number 5 is post lookouts when there's possible danger. So again, this just goes back to knowing what your fire is doing. If you can't see your fire, make sure someone can and you're in communication with that. And post a lookout. This would probably be in your leader's job description to post a lookout to watch the fire in case multiple people are not looking at the fire or can't see the fire type of thing. Yeah, basically it just comes back to know what your fire is doing. Number 6 is be alert, be calm, think clearly, act decisively. So bare bones, don't panic if something seems a little off. Just be calm. It's totally fair to ask questions. If you see like a tree torching, that's kind of the most common thing I've seen on a prescribed fire that gets people a little antsy, is be calm about it, but let people know that it's there. And report that up and someone will tell you what to do with that. If you need to make split-second decisions, just be calm about it and don't second guess yourself on it. Number 7, maintain proper communications with your forces, your supervisor, and your joining forces. So this is really just keep in communication with your crew and your team that you're working with. Talk to them throughout your day, talk to your leader throughout the day. If you're hanging out next to a second holding team, talk to them. Like communication is free flowing. And yeah, just good communication. You'll start to see themes through all of these. Give clear instructions and be sure that they are understood. So this is just communicate clearly, make sure everyone understands what they're doing. Maybe instructions needed to be repeated back. So if I'm the leader, I'm talking to someone on my crew, Bob and Joe, you're going to go down to the right flank and you're going to watch the fire down there and hold that line. Do you understand what I just said, Bob? Bob replies, yes, I'm going to take Joe with me and we're going to go down to the right flank and we're going to hold and watch the fire. So that would be a good way to make sure that your instructions are understood and that they're clear. The 9th is maintain control of your forces at all times. So really, this is just be a good crew member and work together. Sometimes there might be sticky situations where you need to trust your crew members and your leader to know what they're going to do. And work together, keep each other calm. It can get anxious and antsy out there, so just kind of keep each other calm, keep talking to each other. And yeah. Finally, the last one, and this is where like the suppression side gets it. Fight fire aggressively, having provided for safety first. So this basically means like if all of our safety and everything is accounted for, we can go out and have a good prescribed burn. That's kind of the translation into prescribed burn world for that. So that's the 10 standard firefighting orders. They're just kind of good things to know. Keep in the back of your head. We'll move on to the 18 watch out situations. And so in wildfire situations, these are things that firefighters know to watch out for because these are things where accidents happen, fatalities have occurred in the past. They're just slightly more dangerous situations. They don't necessarily want to be put in these situations. So they're good to know on a prescribed fire. So that way we don't put ourselves in a potentially dangerous situation. And if something were to happen, we already know that these potentially could occur. So the first one is you're on a fire that's not scouted or sized up. Typically on all the prescribed burns that I've been on, everybody walks the unit. So we've seen the land, we know what we're doing before we get out there. and start burning. So really the area should be sized up and scouted. So there's that. And if you're on a burn, you can show up a little early before briefing and just go walk the lines if that's not something that is going to be done during the day. You can go walk the lines by yourself, either before or after briefing. Number 2 is you're in country, not seen in daylight. Again, this is a little hard for prescribed burns because typically, at least most of us have seen the area, or at least the planners have seen the area in daylight. And we do sometimes burn at night. It just depends on your PBA. It depends on the complexity of the burn. Burning at night does bring in recovery levels for RHs, and you can have some decent burn windows at night, but it also increases, there's a level of safety. Just burning at night has its own hazards. So I'm not going to say we're never going to burn at night, but it is kind of, it is a thing. But yeah, typically the planners at least have seen the fire area during the day, and they've determined that a night burn is actually going to be more beneficial. So just keeping that in mind. The third one is safety zones and escape routes are not identified. Again, we've talked about this one with the 10 earlier. So again, if your safety zones and escape routes aren't identified, let someone know, figure out where those are. Yeah, and that becomes part of your accountability too. If you don't know something, speak up, ask. We want questions. Number 4, unfamiliar weather and local factors influencing fire behavior. Again, as a prescribed fire association, that's kind of locally based. Yeah, we're kind of in some big counties, but we're local. We know that there's probably going to be wind shifts at some point in that afternoon. We kind of know at least what the weather's going to do. We might not know that specific ridgetop weather, but the planners do. So it's built into the prescribed fire to know what the weather's going to do. But if something comes out of the blue, left field, it happens. Just kind of keeping up to date with what's going on with the weather is a good idea. Uninformed on strategy, tactics, and hazards. If you show up to briefing, you should be informed on the strategy and tactics. And then with hazards, that's just, most of them should be identified at briefing. But this is where your inner team crew communication is. I'm really good at spotting broken tree limbs, and that's people stand under. So I'm going to point those out to people, but someone else might be really good at finding the gopher hole that's on the ground that I don't see. So just pointing out those hazards as you see them is a good practice. Number 6, watch out if instructions or assignments aren't clear. Again, if something's not clear, ask a question. Communication is huge on fires. Number 7, no communication link with crew member or supervisor. Sometimes, yes, you're going to be off by yourself, potentially potentially firing, but you should still be in communication either through radio, or your supervisor should be like walking around and making sure that you don't have any questions. If this becomes too long of a span of time, or you just haven't seen anybody in a while, that's where we need to start getting in contact with them either through radio, text, phone call, walking to go find them type of thing. Just keeping that communication lines open is a good thing. Number 8 is constructing line without a safe anchor point. So this is more so when we're wrapping a slap over or going after spot fires. We want to make sure that our hand lines are tied into a road or another hand line or something, such that we can get a box around the flames. For the most part, most of our burns will have lines around them before we start. So yeah, this is mostly for if we're going after slop overs or spot fires. Watch out situation is 9 is building fire line downhill with fire below. Fire below you is just dangerous because fire can move rapidly uphill through that preheating concept that we talked about on Monday. And just with topography moving it up quicker. So if you're working down towards fire, just inherently knowing that fire moves up very quickly, it could be a potentially dangerous situation. Again, we shouldn't be building handline downhill to begin with. But if we did have to go after a slop over type situation, potentially we would be coming up from downhill to rapid. Number 10 is attempting a frontal assault on a fire. Realistically, we probably won't be doing this at all. Just know that it's potentially dangerous and we really shouldn't ever be in this situation. I'll just leave it at that. 11, unburned fuel between you and the fire. Again, this is just the potential for that fuel to burn. We might be in situations with this on a prescribed fire, but we are moderating that fire behavior such that it's not going to come at us with a full head of steam. So, but just things to be aware of. Number 12, can't see the main fire, not in contact with someone who can. Again, just that continued communication. If you can't see the fire, talk to someone who can and just figure out what the fire is doing. 13, on a hillside where rolling material can ignite the fuel below. Again, we've talked about rolling material going out and causing control issues. This could just be an issue where the material rolls down, run itself back up the hill as we're building line. Again, this is probably going to be in situations of slop over because we'll have the lines already built. But just kind of be aware of rolling material just in general. 14 is weather becoming hotter and drier. So again, remember these are for wildfire situations in the summer where it's already hot and dry. And if weather is getting hotter and drier, that typically means that we're going to see extreme fire behavior. In prescribed fire, we have those prescriptions with a low and high end. So if we're already at our high end and we start getting hotter and drier than what the prescription says, we need to call that out, and someone, probably the burn boss, will probably make the decision to stop burning for the day because now we're outside of our prescription. So that's just kind of that one. Same with 15, winds increase and or change directions. A lot of the areas that we will probably be working in these 3 counties are going to have some wind shifts throughout the day, just from local wind patterns. So knowing when those wind shifts are relatively going to occur and having those known to everyone is going to be key. And then drastic wind increases could potentially be a problem for control. If we're getting frequent spot fires across the line, we're probably losing control of the fire. So if you're on a holding team and you're seeing multiple spot fires and we're having a hard time keeping up with it, that needs to be relayed to someone. So that way either the firing team can stop or we can fix the situation. 17 is terrain and fuel make escape to safety zones difficult. Again, just knowing where those escape and safety zones are going to be is key. And then knowing how to pick the right path to those is helpful. Again, we have the added benefit of being able to prep our burns so we can not make it super difficult. And then number 18 doesn't really apply to prescribed fire because we should never be taking a nap on the fire line as a prescribed burn association. This is more so for those firefighters who work 24, 48 hour shifts and have to get some rest at some point. So yeah, we should never be taking a nap on the fire line. So in summary, we have an acronym called LACES or LCES. And it's lookouts, communication, escape routes or exit routes, they're the same thing, and safety zones. These 4 things, if you can't remember all of the 10s and 18s, remember these 4 things: lookouts, communication, exit routes, and safety zones. These are the summary of all the 10s and 18s. So most of them were about lookouts, being able to see the fire, having someone who can. Lots of them were about communication, communicating with your team, communicating with other teams, just open communication across the board. Having your escape routes known and being able to utilize them very quickly is key, and then knowing where those safety zones are. So yeah, LACES, LCES. That's kind of just the summary of all of these things combined. Finally, we're going to talk about an incident within an incident. And so incident is just, it's the term that emergency personnel use for an emergency situation. So like the park fire, CAL FIRE will refer to that as the park incident because it's a wildfire. But incidents can also be floods, they can be earthquakes, they can be I'm blanking on any other emergency situation, but basically they're just an emergency situation. An incident within an incident is another emergency situation inside of emergency situation. So if we're using wildfire as the example, potentially we had someone roll their ankle on a wildfire, so that becomes an incident within an incident. So on a prescribed fire, we'll just keep the same lingo, incident within an incident. And so we'll go with the rolled ankle example, and we'll walk through what we do. So your partner or someone on your team has rolled their ankle and you're the first one there. And so what you want to do is make sure that you are safe before you go and help them. Make sure like the slope is stable enough for you to go to them, that sort of thing. Just kind of scene awareness, situational awareness. We don't need 2 people hurt now. So that's why we tell you to make sure you're safe before you go and help them. Stay calm, and you might need to calm them down too. They were just hurt, so that can be incredibly stressful. So you remaining calm will help calm them down. You're going to want to contact your leader. And so basically you want to say what the nature of the injury is. So we have a rolled ankle. I'm on, you want to see your location. So I'm on the right flank, that right flank, 300 feet down the line type of thing. Need for additional help. So is this, I need 2 people to help me carry this person up to the road. I need 911 called. We need a helicopter. Tell what sort of resources you might need. I need first aid kit to my location, that sort of thing. And then any change in the safety conditions. So maybe it was someone got stung by a bee and, oh, the bees are swarming now, we need to leave. So now you have to tell people, don't go to this location because the bees are swarming. Your leader will relay all this information to the incident commander, IC, or the burn boss, depending on who wants to know the information. Start shuttling resources to you, getting that first aid kit to you if you needed that, sending more people to you to help carry the person up, getting a truck ready to go to the hospital, that sort of thing. And then 5, if you're willing and able to, provide the care to the level at which you are trained. So essentially, if you are trained in first aid and CPR, we don't expect you to be doing something an EMT would be trained to do. If you are EMT trained, great. If you're not, we're not going to expect you to do that. So yeah, only do the level of care that you are trained to do. At the end of every prescribed burn, there is what's called an after action review or an after action report, an AAR. And basically this is just a chance for the group to kind of gather information and learn from what happened that day. It can be super formal with like a whole sheet, or it can be super informal with just everyone circling up and saying what went right, what went wrong, what did we do to fix certain issues that came up that day. I was on a burn. The questions was, what did you learn today on the burn that you didn't know before? And I thought that was really interesting to add into the after action review. Because every burn I go on, I learn something and I get to put that into my repertoire and just experience level. So being able to see what other people learned made me kind of reflect more on, oh, what did I learn? So yeah, it just kind of allows us to learn and grow and improve as a community and build up to be better. And that's it for the training, for the virtual training. We're coming up on the in-person field days. Napa's is this Saturday from 8:30 to 12:30. We will be sending out an email, I think tomorrow afternoon. We're waiting for a couple more people to sign up before we shoot out some emails. We will tell you what to bring, what clothes to wear. It does look like it's supposed to rain on Saturday, potentially, or at least be foggy, so be prepared for moisture at least. But yeah, we will send out the address, we will send out what clothes to wear, that whole sort of thing, for Saturday, and then Yolo and Solano's will send out information as they get closer. But all three, you only have to go to one, whatever one works best for you. And then all three of the upcoming field days will be covering fire patterns and drip torches without live fire, because we are in August and September. And then we'll be playing with hand tools and building hand line and just getting comfortable with using those tools and working as a team. And then we will be playing with kestrels and slings like chronometers, to take weather readings, and then we'll play with radios and broadcast the weather readings over the radio. Questions?
There's none in the chat, so.
Again, we recorded this so we can send it out to you guys tomorrow, I think. It might be for next week, but yeah. Feel free to contact us if you have questions. Here's all of our contact information.
And also, I'm going to drop the recording, the YouTube thing in the chat in just a second. So if you missed the first one, I'll drop that in the chat.
There's
Oh,
a question.
There was a question.
It says, are we thinking about canceling Napa? Absolutely not. We're gonna go with it. I'd rather be wet than sweaty, so I'll play in the rain.
There'll
But
be
yeah, we're not
easy
canceling.
ups too, so you might be able to cover yourself a little bit. So
Yeah, we'll have pop-ups and there's trees, so I don't think it'll be too wet. I think it's only supposed to be like 1/10 of an inch tomorrow night and then just drizzly fog Saturday, so I don't think it'll be too bad.
Yeah, I just checked the forecast and I think Saturday is actually going to end up being pretty nice. There'll be some cloud cover and a little chilly in the morning, but we should be good.
Sweet. See, I was worried we were gonna be in like 110, so I will
Yeah.
take whatever we get.
No, this will be great.
yeah, and in case you missed the first recording, I just dropped the YouTube link in the chat so you guys can access that.
Yeah, I think if there's no other questions and Bailey and Elizabeth don't have anything else, I think we're done for tonight.
Thanks, everybody. We appreciate your time and we'll see you at one of the field days.